you, Wendy, for the opportunity. I'm Rutgers, obviously. I see some alumni, which is great, and some other people that are interested in pricing, which is also great. So first of all, I want to say hello to the alumni that joined us, and a bit of an explanation to community. The way that this Powerhouse series work is Rutgers invite one of the current professors. I teach managerial economic analysis to give kind of a seminar on a current topic, let's say. So there's two ways of going about this. One would be with PowerPoint and put a few slides up, but I prefer to do it the way that I teach. So it would give those that are not in the program a glimpse into what it's like to be in class, right? So that's why we're going to use a whiteboard. I'm going to be writing a ton of stuff on a whiteboard as we go along. In order to do that, I'll be switching between the camera and the whiteboard, so just bear with me. So a little bit about me. As I was saying, I'm teaching at Rutgers. I've been teaching at Rutgers since 2010. So that's been 10 years. I'm a former graduate from the executive MBA program. I did it in New Jersey from 2008 to 2010. And my career spans 20 years in managerial positions, executive positions in several industries, starting from project management in pharmaceuticals, being in corporate development and analytics in industrial companies, and lately as running operations for a German multinational, for a German manufacturer of precision instruments, both for the medical devices industry and for industrial metrology and research and development. So that's what I do. And as I said, I teach also for Rutgers. It's something I take a lot of pride on. And I do use at work what I teach, and I teach what I use. So this is going to be a practical lecture, let's just say. So without further ado, I think we're going to get into business. Another thing to say, I'm based in Madrid right now, in Spain, where I'm from. So there's a bit of time difference. I think you guys are going into the evening while it's noon for me here, hence the light. And I think it's wonderful that due to technology these days, we can be doing these things. So let's go with it. When we talk about pricing, what I plan on doing is, first of all, is understanding a little bit of the basics. So I think the first 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes maybe, we're just going to run over a few concepts. And we're going to go into a step-by-step guide to set up a global pricing strategy. And the global part is very important because it's not the same to set a pricing strategy just for one country, or just for one market, just for one customer, as to setting up really some guidelines about how to go about setting that pricing strategy. And that's going to be one of the key things here. How are you global in terms of having some guiding principles for everybody, but that you're flexible enough for in-country specifics. Something else to bear in mind is that when we're talking about pricing typically is something that everybody touches, but nobody owns. So it's rare that there's an organization, a built-up pricing organization within a company, or that is very, very easy for everybody and understood, communicated, to know who is responsible for pricing in my organization. That person, that's the guy that's responsible for pricing. It's not like that most of the time. We're going to review some findings from a Boston Consulting Group survey a couple of years ago about pricing. We're going to see how it's not the case, and how companies that are fluent in pricing can add tremendous profitability, can add a tremendous margin to the bottom line. So let me start. Let me switch to the whiteboard real quick so we cover some of the basics. As I said, when I switch to the whiteboard, so let me share my screen. Hopefully you can all see it. Now you won't see me, but you'll be able to see the whiteboard. And we're going to cover some of the basics here. The alumni in the call, this may bring some cold sweats, remembering those days doing graphs with me, but let's start by understanding the basics. So let's go right ahead with that and go for the basics. Once again, I could have all of this on PowerPoint. I chose not to. So the basics are, the first of all, why is pricing important? Why do we need to worry about pricing, right? The why is always important. And it's because we should have an objective in mind. And that's that we're trying to manage revenue for profitable growth, not just growth, but for profitable growth. So you want to get to profitable growth. What does that mean? That means that when you're talking about the profit in your company, we can boil it down. That's by, it's going to be your revenue minus your cost, right? And I'm fully aware that you have your gross profit, then you take something out of your net profitability, all of that. I'm fully aware of how it works up and down the line. But we're boiling things down to better understand the basics. So your profitability is going to be your revenue minus your cost. And one thing that right now, what companies are focusing, and quite rightly so, is on cost, right? During coronavirus, where the demand for in some industries has practically vanished, what we are all focused is on how we can control and reduce those costs, right? And that's why you see companies that are going through massive rounds of layoffs, companies or countries, for example, in Spain, by legislation, you couldn't do layoffs that were permanent because of the coronavirus, but you had to go through a temporary stage where people would be stay home and maybe work just 50% of the time, or 20% or 70%, whatever that was, to try to manage those costs. But in normal times, in regular times, you need to have a key strategy, obviously, for your revenue side. And that's going to come through two sides. One of them is pricing, and we'll talk about that. And one of them is through demand shifters. And we're going to mention a bit of both in a minute. So we're trying to manage profitable growth, as I was saying. It's not so much about containing the cost, because you cannot, mark my words, you cannot cut your way into profitability forever. That doesn't exist. You have to be lean, you have to be mean, and all that good stuff, but you cannot cut your way into profitability forever. You need to have a revenue strategy, and that's going to consist, as I was saying, pricing or demand shifters. So let me very quickly talk for a minute about the demand. We need to understand the demand for our products, and we need to understand how it works. As you may or may not know, our demand is the function that is going to relate the prices that I sell a product and how much of that product I sell. And by the law of demand, if nothing else changes, I'm going to sell more, right? So if I was selling at a P0 and I was selling quantity, if I reduce my price, typically I will sell more if nothing else changes. But we all know that sales would be the easiest job in the world if I could sell at whatever price I wanted, right? If you gave me full freedom, full range of freedom, I would be the most successful salesman ever. Why? Because I would just give it all away. But that is not profitable. That is not profitable growth. Giving stuff away or selling it too cheap is just not the way to go. And there lies one of the main issues. What is too cheap? Do we have the systems in place to know where our pricing should be? Are we collecting the data and doing the business analytics to figure out where our price would be? We're going to talk about all that as we go along today. And by the way, if anybody has any questions as I move along, just unmute your phone and ask your question. By the way, I don't think I even said my name. My name is Ignacio Vijil, but you can by all means call me Nacho. Okay, everybody calls me Nacho, and that's totally okay with me. So as I was saying, if we sell cheaper, we're going to sell more. But the whole point is how I can sell more without having to sell cheaper. And how do I manage that? I could manage that if I was able to sell this quantity, Q1, at the original price without having to sell cheaper. I could have engineered what we call a demand shift. We've just pushed our demand out, right? I'm no longer working on this demand. I've pushed my demand out. And now I can sell at that price, at the original price, P0, I can sell Q1. So there lies two of the three considerations that we need to have. And it's, what should my pricing be? We're gonna get into that. How do we enable the organization? How do we put the process in place? What do we need to consider when we're setting up pricing and in a global basis? Second, we're gonna look at how I can push that demand out, right? The 7 tools of nachonomics that some of you, I hope, remember. And third, we're gonna talk about something that is called the elasticity of our demand, right? A concept, elasticity, which essentially says or deals with how responsive our demand is. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to talk about this, about the demand shifters and the elasticity, and then we're going to get into really the subject of this conference, if you want, that is about pricing. How do we go ahead and set up that pricing? So let me add one more page here, turn the page on the whiteboard, and let's talk briefly about elasticity first. So you've just seen how we have a demand that is going to tell us, that's the demand for our products, and it's going to tell us for any given prices how much we're likely to sell, right? So let me show you 2 different demands. That's one. And that's 2. And these demands, they're obviously different. You can see that the one on the left is very flat. The one on the right is very steep. Well, if we did a similar price change for both, so if we started at P0 and we had a quantity Q0, if we reduce price, and the same would be if we raise price, look how much more responsive the demand on the left is to changes in prices. The demand on the left is said to be fairly elastic, and the demand on the right is said to be fairly inelastic. And you may be thinking, okay, so what? Well, if it was me, I would love to have a fairly inelastic demand, because that means that instead of going from P0 to P1, if I go from P1 to P0, I'm losing very little sale. And if I'm doing something else to push this demand out, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be way better off. That's going to be profitable growth. But if I'm on a fairly elastic market, or there's a fairly elastic demand for my products, that means that small changes in prices are going to have a huge effect on sales. But that means that we're going to be tempted very much so, our sales force are going to be tempted very much so to sell on price. And one of the things that we need to take into consideration, one of the key takeaways from here is that you should be selling on value, not price. Anybody that has been through sales training knows that this is a constant. You should be selling your customers on the value that your products or services are are gonna bring, not just the fact that they're cheaper, because there'll always be someone cheaper. There'll always be someone that will be willing to take that hit and sell cheaper than you. So it's important to understand whether our demand is fairly elastic or is fairly inelastic, because that's going to tell us whether we have some latitude to play with prices or not, right? Now, when we're talking, I mentioned about demand shifters. I mentioned about how we can sell more without selling cheaper, regardless of whether our demand is fairly elastic or fairly inelastic. How can we, let me go back here, how can we engineer this demand shift? How can we push that out? And there's several things that can be done for this. One of them we'll talk about at length. That's going to be most of the time we have together. So if we're looking at those 7 tools, the first one is your pricing strategy. And that's the one that we're going to be developing here. There's up to, I mean, there's dozens of pricing strategies, but in the class that I teach, for example, we look at 25 different pricing strategies that you can implement to sell your product or service. Those goes from as simple as a cost plus pricing to penetration pricing, loss leading pricing, price scheming that Apple is very good at, premium pricing that you guys I'm sure are familiar with, their opposite, economy pricing, freemium, the most digital newspapers use, two-part tariff pricing, bundling, pricing discrimination. There's a ton of things that can be done there that unfortunately we don't have the time to go into. But there's 7 tools. One of them is the pricing strategy. One. The second one is changing the attributes of the product or service. So are my attributes meeting my customers' needs? Are they, am I targeting the right customers with the product that I have to begin with? What changes do I need to make there? How can I improve product, right? Then you have your typical advertising within your marketing campaigns. Am I telling the world about my products and services? Am I telling the right people? And if I am, if it's being successful, that would engineer your demand shift. Now, can you play with the prices of related products? And here we're looking at your complement products. One of the typical examples for this is printers and toners, right? If I reduce the price of printers, I'm going to sell more printers, and therefore I'm going to sell more toner, which is where the margins are. If you sold the ink in the toner cartridges by the gallon, you could be selling it at $64,000 a gallon. That's how much, that's the margin that you get on, excuse me, the toner. Or substitute products. Substitute products is typically when you have ranges. So you may have the okay, you may have the good, and you may have the OMG, right? And you can steer your demand towards one or the other by playing with prices of the 3. And then here, if you reduce the price of a complement, that'll be your 5th strategy. If you increase the price of your substitute, that'll be your 6th. And then we move to number 7, which is expanding your customer base. Where can I find more customers? And that can be done many different ways. You could be looking at a new brand. We'll talk about a good example in a minute. We're going to talk about branding. You could be looking at entering literally new markets, as in going to new geographies, new regions. You could be increasing your distribution channels. This has been done. This has been forced actually by the coronavirus in many, many retailers, that they have beefed up their online presence because people couldn't just go to the stores. So they have increased, improved their distribution channels, in this case, the online channels. So all of that can be done to push that demand out. We need to be aware of the elasticity. But now we get into the key. These pricing strategies. How do I go about setting up a pricing strategy? You have to understand that we're talking about global pricing strategy, right? So if we're talking about global pricing strategy, we are going to need a holistic approach. So we're going to need some sort of guidelines that are consistent across markets. So you need consistent approach, let's just say, across markets. So for several reasons. First of all, because consumers nowadays, they can compare prices, and that can have an effect internationally. And also, most important, because it's going to ensure the effectiveness and efficiency across the different companies, the different global marketing and sales organizations. But he remains the key. You have the consistent approach, but that's just the approach, because you need to have the local flexibility. And hitting that sweet spot is very difficult. It's extremely difficult. It needs to be flexible enough so it can be country specific. But at the same time, those guidelines about how to go about setting that pricing, there has to be a consistent approach. And why is this all important? Because pricing is personal. That's important to understand. Pricing is personal. The price that a company is charging me, it's affecting me personally. That when you go to sell to another company, the price that you're charging them, it's personal. That's their price. And that says a lot about your brand. That says a lot about your customer service. That says a lot about everything that is important to you. So pricing is personal. And it affects the brand, as I was saying. And the brand is not the same as the logo. It's not the same as a trademark. A brand is a collection of emotions. A brand is what that brand makes the customer feel. So you remember, guys, when Netflix did their first price increase, they went, I believe, I don't have the data in front of me. I remember that it was something like maybe from $3.99 or something like that. It went all the way to up to $10, more or less, up to, let's just say, $10. There were riots on the street, not on the street, but online. There were riots. How is Netflix robbing me now? They've raised from $4 to around $10. This is outrageous. The value of Netflix, you could argue, as a matter of fact, they just changed the price in the three programs. Netflix follows the OK, good, and OMG system, and they've just raised prices. And there hasn't been any rioting. Why? Because people understand now the value of Netflix. At the beginning, in its infancy, it was seen as they just want to get more money out of me. That was the feeling that first price increase produced. So once we've understood, a consistent approach, local flexibility, the pricing is personal, it's going to affect your branding. Let's go. If you guys are ready, let's go through those steps, those 5 steps. So we have 5 steps to develop the global pricing strategy. The first one is very simple, in theory, which is understand the status quo. Where are we? What's our current positioning? So you would understand where you are, right? Understand your current positioning. And your pricing strategy. So are we a premium pricing versus value? Are we having a penetration strategy in new markets? Are we skimming? What is it that we're doing? What is it that as a company, how are we perceived? Are we a product, a technology product that we can sell based on that technology? Are we a service selling company? Where are we? And does our pricing reflect who we are? What's our current position in the market? It means understanding competition too. Because we typically understanding competition. The human mind is set to make constant comparisons. So who we are, it's also with regards to who our competitors are, how are they behaving, and what are they doing, right? So here, just to give you a brief glimpse into different companies, the Boston Consulting Group did a survey, as I said a couple of years ago, and they had very interesting findings. Boston Consulting Group survey had very interesting findings about pricing. First one, it was that more than 50% of the companies that they surveyed, they had no well-defined or in place strategy, or it wasn't aligned with business goals, or it wasn't properly communicated to the organization. That's more than 50% that did not have either the pricing strategy, or it wasn't aligned with the business goals, or it wasn't communicated with to the organization, etc., etc. Then they found that around 2/3 of the companies that they surveyed had trouble tracking actual prices. This is huge. Tracking the actual prices that were charged. What does this mean? Well, you can have the pricing strategy, you can communicate it correctly, everybody may say, yes, we're on board, and then how do you know if this is going through? How do you know if it's been properly implemented? How do you know if we're saying that for this particular product family, for this type of customer in this region, this is the range that we can charge? How do you know if that's happening? 2/3 of the companies that they surveyed said they had trouble tracking that. Then an astonishing 80% of those companies lacked the analytics for making effective price moves. So 80% lack the analytics. Analytics are going to play a huge role in implementing your pricing strategy, because analytics is what's going to allow you to understand the status quo and to track progress. And then last but not least, those companies that they had a dedicated pricing organization that was acting as a strategic partner could and did increase profitability in a range by 1% to 2%, just because having that pricing organization, not because of anything else. So the ones that had a dedicated pricing organization could increase that profit in a range between 1% and 2%. That organization, we're going to talk a little bit about it in a minute, that's important to that it acts as a strategic partner to the rest of the business. Okay, so first step, understanding where we are, who we are. Does that price reflect who we are? Do we understand what the competition is doing? Are they is their pricing well defined? How often do they change pricing? What have we done in the past? Are we price leaders? Are we price followers? How are we segmenting our customers to do that pricing? Are we segmenting them by type of customer? It could be public customer when we're bidding for projects versus a private one. Are we segmenting them by size? Are we segmenting them by the region where they are within the same country? What is it that we're doing? Are we charging a tiny customer and a smaller price that we're charging one of our big key accounts? Can we track that? Does our Salesforce sale on value as opposed to just on price? So those are all considerations to take when we're figuring out that status quo. Now, if we move to step number 2, we've now understood where we are, and now we need to develop the strategy. That's fairly intuitive. We're going to develop the strategy. Now, how are we going to go about that? Well, what's important here is that you are setting guiding principles. That's what we're looking for. You're setting guiding principles for all the actors about how to set prices, as I said, how you localize it, right? And when you are developing this strategy, you set those guiding principles that are going to be driving your strategic objectives. Those have to be aligned. So, do we want to increase market share? We increase the basket value. What's our positioning and left? Very important. How will end customers receive strategy? How brand, the pricing within the same brand. I can tell you a story my students will recall. For example, Armani. You guys remember that back in the day, Armani, if you wanted to buy an Armani shirt, it would cost you maybe $125 to $150 because it was Armani, and high quality Italian design, etc., etc. And then you have fast fashion coming along, the Zara's of this world, the H&M, the Mangos of this world, and all those companies. You could get a very nice shirt that it was good enough quality and with a nice design for around $45, $50. And what did Armani do? Armani had a choice with pricing to make. Armani could say, okay, we're going to start selling our shirts at $60, or we're going to sell them closer to those fast fashion, but that's not who Armani was and who Armani is. Armani, the brand Armani, exudes exclusivity. This is about premium pricing Armani. So what did they do? In order to compete with those new entrants, they created Armani Exchange. And now with Armani Exchange, they moved into the model of okay, good, and OMG, which is a way of saying good, better, best. And now you wanted an Armani Exchange shirt? Sure, you can have it for $60. And now you are competing against your Zara's of the world. But if you want the real deal, you're still going to be paying $125 for your Armani shirt. But that, you're segmenting the market, and that 125 shirt is not competing against Zara. Then you're competing against again, other famous Italian designers, or whatever that may be. So when you're developing the strategy, you may realize that as part of those guiding principles and aligning the strategic objectives, you need to be very, very conscious about not cannibalizing one brand, about what are the effects that you can have the pricing with one particular brand or one particular set of products within a brand. So we have understood, hopefully, where we were. We are developing the strategy. And now we are going to formalize it. Now, this formalization, it's all about support from the top. Step number 3 is formalize the strategy. And I'm saying this is about support from the top. This is key. This needs to be seen as coming from the boardroom. Why? Because a pricing strategy, it really is about change management. The only person that likes change is a wet baby. Everybody else, we are designed to hate change because we're looking for, once again, human mind, you're looking for security, to have your basic needs covered. And one of them is security, feel safe. So changes make a lot of people feel unsafe. Change management, it's one of the most difficult things to do because we're trying to convince people to do things differently than they were doing it before. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We're talking about support from the top. As I was mentioning before, or typically in many companies, everybody touches pricing, but no one owns it. Nobody knows who the responsible is. So one of the ways of achieving this support from the top and formalizing the strategy is having a pricing organization, a dedicated pricing organization. These are people whose role is to track, monitor, and change pricing. But not only that, to then socialize that pricing across the organization. And that's tremendously difficult, as I say, because that's about change management. So we're gonna look into the change management as when we talk about the next step about managing the implementation. So support from the top and pricing organization. Some companies have gone as far as having a chief pricing officer that sits in the C-suite. So you have your CEO, your COO, your CFO, all the CEOs that you want, and one of those is your chief pricing officer. What those companies have experienced is that pricing, first of all, becomes a priority. Second of all, so you have pricing is a priority. Pricing has visibility for everybody, and more so at the top. And pricing becomes part of who the company is. And remember when we said at the beginning that that was one of the key of being effective, setting pricing. So this is not easy either, because, and more in a global perspective, because you're talking about building a whole new organization. Your chief pricing officer that is going to have pricing directors by region, probably pricing managers, and so on. But if the company goes through this effort, remember when I said that 1 to 2% in the bottom line, just because of having the pricing organization that acts as a strategic business partner, well, that's going to pay by itself very, very quickly, because that 1 to 2%, it's going to be just because of having that organization working with every local market. Then the actions that are going to put in place, those are going to obviously help tremendously that bottom line. So part of formalizing the strategy is having published guidelines. You need to have a blue book. People need to know about how to go, about setting pricing, about what data is needed, about what needs to be considered when you're setting pricing, about what segmentations make sense. This pricing organization, the role of this pricing organization is also guiding people through that. So if this organization is built, one of the first roles is to teach people about pricing. To teach people about pricing. Why? You have plenty of individuals for the sales managers in the call. Emilio Rigamonti, for example, my good friend and alumni Emilio, sure has some of these in his organization, but these are people that have been selling for 25 years, same product to the same customers and doing it quite successfully. But those people, we're going to have to retrain. We're going to have to say, yeah, that's how we used to do things. But now we're going to be told how to do pricing. That wraps off not so well with some people, and we'll talk about that when we dig deeper into the change management and managing the implementation. So you need to have some internal, obviously, published guidelines about how to go about this. And very important, you need to set KPIs. Remember when we were looking at, and I'm going to go back to whatever I had the results from business consulting group. Here we go. When we were talking about, where is it? 2/3 of companies had trouble tracking the actual pricing, and 80% of them lack the analytics to do so. Well, you need to set some KPIs that you can track and that make sense. So, so you can see how you're doing. What are some of these KPIs that you could be tracking? Well, margins for once, if that's what you're after, if that's your objective. One very important is price realization, which is okay for customer segment A, whatever that segment is. That is going to depend all on the industry, on the market, etc. But customer segment A on this region for this size, this is the range, price range that we determined that was acceptable. Okay, what have been the prices for that particular segment? So what's the percentage? How often are we realizing the pricing that we set? Is it at 20%? Okay, we have a problem. Is it an 85%, 90%? We are on the right track. We're absolutely doing well. Related to price realization, you have profit leaking. Profit leaking that's exactly what it says on the can. Profit leaking is about, okay, if we had realized the price that we've set up, we would have had X profit. Because of those areas, customer segments, products where we have not realized pricing, how much profit we have left on the table. This is very powerful. This is very powerful because if you take these KPIs, and here comes the kicker, you make them part of compensation, you're going to change the culture very, very quickly. Part of compensation, you are going to change the culture very quickly. Doesn't like me writing here on the bottom left corner. Okay, we'll take it. So if you make them part of compensation, if now the conversations with your Salesforce, your sales teams, part of those reviews is, well, you left, making this up, $1,237,422 on the table of profit. That changes the conversation radically. You realize you set the prices that we agreed that needed to be set on 28% of the times. Well, yeah, but I sold a lot. Yes, you did, but that's not enough. We are a Salesforce. We have been in the past decade, certainly, there's been an acceleration and transformation of Salesforce. In what sense? Before, it was enough to sell. I just sell a lot. And if my target is sales, I need to sell $1 million. I hit my $1 million, I'm a great salesman. Then it moved to, it's not how much you sell, it's how well you sell. It's, you need to sell $1 million, yes, but what's more important, we need to make $300,000 of profit. Okay, so I sold $1 million or more, I made $300,000 of profit. That's great. But now there's a third step that is not enough. It's, we need to know who you're selling to, who you're contacting, how often you're contacting them, what are you talking about, why? Because if you leave tomorrow, that's knowledge we lost. So for anybody that has been through the implementation of a CRM, for example, for sales, knows what I'm talking about. customer relationship management systems. There was one person in a company I used to work that was a very good salesman in the terms of phase number 2. I sell a lot and profitably, fine. But now we need from you, we need you to maintain the CRM with information. So if I want to run a forecast, I don't need to go and ask you. I can go click, 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 and I have an accurate forecast. And if I want to look at your sales funnel and look at your leads, your opportunities, your offers, and see your conversion rate and all that good stuff, so I understand how realistic it is, that forecast, I need to go to the CRM. And I want to know for your key accounts, how often are you visiting your A customers, your B customers, your C customers, with all that information. This person was not ready to do that. To the point that he said to management, he expressed in no uncertain terms, I'm not going to use the CRM. I'm selling, I'm hitting my numbers. Do not tell me how to do my job. The consequence was, a month afterwards, that person lost his job. Why? Because it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to sell on pricing. It wasn't enough just to sell profitably. Now we're on step number 3. Well, pricing, really, a pricing organization is a step number 4 on this. It's going one step further. Is we're going to have dedicated people that are going to tell us what we should be doing with pricing, specifically by customer, by size, and more important, how to think about pricing on those terms. Okay? So we have understood where we were. We can see, based on this survey, that most companies have a long way to go. So I wouldn't be surprised if whichever company you work for still has a long way to go. We have developed the strategy. This is some guiding principles aligned with our strategic objectives. What do we want to do in each market? Who do we want to be, etc. How do we gather that data? Do we have the teams in place to be able to understand that? Do we have the right skills in our people? How is our pricing going to be perceived? How is it going to impact each brand, etc., etc.? We have formalized the strategy with support from the top. If this culture is set at the top, and when you're talking about changing pricing, about having a proper way of setting pricing, a proper pricing methodology that is part of the fiber of the company, part of who the company is, and I put here, it needs to be part of the culture. And culture is just set from the top. It's just set from the top. And it has to be seen. You know what the message sent to the organization that I was mentioning before, when that salesman lost his job because he refused very publicly to use the CRM? The message that's sent, that's not who we are any longer. That's not the type of organization that we are any longer. That's not how we approach sales and pricing any longer. So we formalize the strategy, we publish guidelines, we're setting KPIs, and now we need to implement. Plans are nothing if they're not implemented. Even though Eisenhower said, plans are nothing, planning is everything. You need to go through that effort to learn about the organization. So number 4, managing the implementation. And this is where that change management is going to kick in. There's research that says that it takes someone, I used to run a call center in another life, and there's research that says that someone that has a bad experience with a call center, it takes them 17 good experiences to change their impression. Lastly, to have an impression that says, yes, now I'm convinced. There's also research that says that for a message to be understood, truly understood and integrated in terms of, okay, I mean, I internalized this message, it has to be told at least 15 times, okay? So just saying this is not going to change the culture of the organization. So when we're talking about managing the implementation, here's where that change management comes in. This needs to be active communication. This needs to be dedicated communication. It needs to be a consistent message. That is delivered often, that they're dedicating town halls about this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is how it's going to impact you, and you need to gain, as in any project of sorts, you need to gain your early adopters. Who are these guys? Who's these people? These are those ambassadors that you're gonna identify. These are gonna be your internal champions. You need to ID those internal champions, because these are the guys that are gonna help others internalize this message. These are the guys that are gonna help the rest of the Salesforce, the marketing teams, etc. And this is important because you most likely are going to have to retrain your Salesforce. And you're going to run into the situation that I ran with that person with the CRM. You're going to run into a situation with people, Salesforce, that are going to say, I don't think this is a good idea. I cannot work like this. I cannot have someone that is telling me how we're going to be setting prices when I've been doing for 25 years. And how am I going to go to this customer that is the godfather to my son and tell him that I'm going to raise prices on him? How am I going to do that? How am I going to lose face that way? That retraining of Salesforce is going to lead to some churn rate. Okay, some people will leave the organization. Some people will leave the organization, but those that stay and internalize this will thrive. Okay, this is similar to any, as I said, implementation of tools, right? That people need to get used to. This is more important than that, because you're going to need Salesforce that have two types of skills for implementing this pricing. They're going to need soft skills to do what? To sell on value, to consistently deliver on the value promise of the brand, not on just we are cheaper. So soft skills, but then they're going to need some hard skills. And what are these ones? These are both technological and analytical. Some analytical skills to understand how pricing is being formed, to understand the customer segmentation, to understand. I work with a company when I was director of corporate development and business analytics at an industrial company in the US, New Jersey. It was in the water infrastructure, and we partnered with a company that what they did was they analyzed, they helped us with the customer segmentation. By the way, all of these steps, it's not a bad idea not to do them alone. So getting some help from someone that has been through them, or companies that are specialized on defining pricing and setting up those pricing strategies and implementing them. So this particular company, what they did is they would analyze historical data, and they would check, they would ask us to do a customer segmentation. And we work with them to see what was the customer segmentation that made more sense, whether it was regionally, by type of customer, a combination of both. And then they had a software that would allow us to see within each segmentation for down to an SKU, what were the prices that had been charged for customers in the same area, in the same region, and the same type of customer for the exact same product. And the results were astonishing, because we could see that, for product A, in a type of customer B in area C. So all in that very specific place, we would see that that product A, maybe we sold it, I'm making this up. Some people will sold it at $10, some people will sold it at $12, some people will sell it at $6. So there was no consistency whatsoever, none. But this allowed us to build a range that could be profitable growth, that we wouldn't give it away, knowing how much we had already charged for that product, that same product, similar customers in the same area, we had charged up to $12 in this case. That allowed us to set up a range that we instructed the Salesforce not to go down from. This is the new range, no more of this. But more importantly, we need to track it. And that software was integrated into our ERP to the point that you could see what that price was. You could see historic pricing. You would see essentially these three prices, and then the one that was, then the range that was selected. So Salesforce and back office, whenever they got a call for an order, they had that information handy so they could set those prices. So, and that came up because I was talking, the hard skills, the analytical skills. So in that particular example, we had to train our Salesforce, we had to train our back office about how that worked. Once you retrain people, then you're gonna pilot and get early wins. That low-hanging fruit, that's very important. Early wins. Let's pilot in one small area. Let's see how this works. Let's learn from it, and let's start scaling it up. Okay. Once you've done that, now we have to, if you just do it once, this will fall by the wayside. Step number 5 is reiterate and refine regularly, which essentially means this needs to be part of your planning cycle. So everybody needs to know, the same way that the year has 4 quarters, and maybe you're doing your forecast for next year, you start working on it on Q3, and so it's refined on Q4, and then tracked throughout the year, and then you're having true ups at the end of every month or whatever. Part of that needs to be that's the forecast of sales. But hey, remember that Q3 we start our pricing planning for next year, and pricing, it should be something, your objective is to get to dynamic pricing, which is we have the tools in place, we have the analytics in place, the business intelligence, the organization to know when and how we should be changing pricing based on what we're seeing in the market. That needs feedback. That needs constant feedback from the market about what prices are being charged, both yours, which is the easy part, and the competition. So those are the 5 steps to, and I have some additional considerations I'm going to tell you in a minute, but let's just, before I go into those, let's just have a bit of a recap of what we were saying. You know what? No, let's do the considerations and then we'll do a recap. That makes more sense. So some additional considerations, some of them, we've mentioned them throughout this seminar. So some additional considerations to have, some additional thoughts. The first one is that pricing is a complex business. Pricing is not easy. Pricing is a complex business. Do not go into this thinking, this is going to be easy, this is going to get done in 2 months, and we're ready to go. Pricing is a complex business, and pricing is a process. It's not a decision. Pricing is a process. It's an evolving process. It's a dynamic process. It's a global process that needs to have the flexibility to be localized. And you are going to need, very much so, you are going to need, as number 3, pricing needs data. It's a complex business, it's a process, and it needs data. What do I mean by that? You need, first of all, if it's a complex business, because in companies with many SKUs, product lines, etc., you may not even know now what's being charged in the same customer segments. I was saying in the same area for the same product. You may not have that information. You're going to need that data, and you're going to need that data power, business intelligence, to be able to crunch, to make sense of that data. And I always say, in all the companies I've worked at, I always said that whenever you put in place either a pricing process or any other process that is going to fundamentally change the way you do things, you need to do it. And one of them is, for example, forecasting. You need to combine quantitative data plus qualitative information. Your quantitative data is fairly clear. These are facts. This is what we charge to whom, when. This is what the competition was doing. This is how much we charged before. This is how much profit we left on the table. This is all those KPIs that we were talking about. That's the quantitative data. And the qualitative info, this is where the people that know the market the best are your sales and marketing, right? That qualitative info is, where is the market going? Your strategy team can help with this too. Where is the market going? Where are the customers feeling? I used to, for example, in that same company I was talking about, in the water infrastructure, I ran a project that it was about forecasting, as I was mentioning before, because we wanted to use quantitative data, some models, statistical models like multiple regression analysis or whatever that may be, to see what the trend would tell us that our sales would be. But if our sales would tell us that sales would go up next year by 5%, okay, that's the quantitative part. Now let's put salt, pepper, and olive oil. Does that make sense? That a boss of mine used to say all the time, does that pass the smell test? So it's 5% growth. Is it reasonable in this market? What are our people on the ground saying? What are our customers expecting? Are we talking to our key accounts to say, what do you expect next year? And if they're saying that they expect a 10% increase, okay, maybe this is reasonable, maybe conservative. But if they're saying that their market, if you send to distribution, for example, if they're saying that their market, it's going down, this is not going to be reasonable. So once you collect your quantitative data, qualitative info, you put it together, that's going to give you ranges. Same with pricing, absolutely the same. So pricing is a complex business, pricing is a process, and pricing needs data. So now is when we can do that recap before I open for questions. So why are we here today in the first place? Because we want profitable growth. And to achieve that, we can do it obviously on the cost side, but you cannot cut your way into profitability forever. You need to look into your revenue side. You need to look into your pricing strategies and how you set them. And that's what today was about. And you need to look into how you can push that demand out so you can sell more without selling cheaper. And at the same time, you need to understand whether your demand is fairly elastic or fairly inelastic, because it's easy to sell on price, but you want to sell on value. So there are several strategies that can be used to push that demand out. Some of them that are fairly straightforward, like advertising, and some of them that are not as straightforward, like how to expand that customer base. But because we are targeting, today we're talking about a global, how to set pricing in a global scale, you need a consistent approach because it's going to be efficient for all the different countries to follow. It's going to be easy to, it makes more sense to have a holistic approach that is going to add effectiveness and efficiency across the business units, but it has to be flexible enough for flexibility. And pricing is important because it affects who you are. It affects how your customer perceives you. So what are the 5 steps? We talked about understanding the status quo, the current positioning, and our pricing strategy, which involves also competition. And we saw how most companies have still a long way to go, but those that took this seriously, how they can add significantly to the bottom line. We need to develop the strategy, those guiding principles aligned with your strategic objectives, and how taking paying a close attention to how it's going to affect our different brands that we may have. We formalize the strategy that has to come from the top. That has to come from the top. We need to have pricing become part of the culture. We may opt to have a pricing organization that is going to be led, could be led by a chief pricing officer or just at a lower level, but the CEO needs to say this is important, because then it becomes important for everybody. Publish guidelines, and hugely important, your KPIs. How are we going to track this? How are we going to collect that data to track it? And does everybody understand what price realization is, profit leaking is? And you know what? Let's put this as part of compensation for our sales and marketing teams and everybody else involved. And then you'll see things change. Let's manage the implementation, that change management, deliver up to 15 times one message so it's understood and internalized. It has to be consistent and often. And you need to get some early adopters, those ambassadors that are going to train the others, that are going to help the others. Speaking of training, you're going to have to retrain your Salesforce. And that's going to lead to some people leaving. That's fine, because you're moving one step forward as an organization. Sometimes that leaves some people behind. So you're going to go from reactive pricing to dynamic pricing, right? We need to reiterate once you're, as part of the implementation pilot, and make sure you get some early wins. And then reiterate and refine regularly, so it's part of your planning cycle. So in closing, pricing is a complex business. It's a process, and you're going to need data and the infrastructure to crunch that data. So I've been talking for a while now. I've been talking for 1 hour and 10 minutes. So we have 20 minutes scheduled for questions. If anybody has any question, please go ahead. Any questions, comments, anybody wants to share their personal experience with this type of process, I'm all ears. I have a lot of shy people in this call.
Very shy. Good day, Nacho.
Hello, James. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Good to see you. Good to hear you.
You're still in Thailand? You're still in Thailand?
Still in Thailand, yes. Bangkok has recently entered lockdown again. So schools are closed. Children are homeschooling. So we're enjoying that process.
This was your excuse to get away from the kids. I understand. I have three, as you know, 3 young kids that are downstairs right now with their mother. They're probably dying to get into this.
Are you still in Madrid, Nacho?
I'm still in Madrid. Yeah.
So you've been enjoying a bit of a cold snap then this last few days.
As a matter of fact, I left New Jersey, running away from the cold winters, and I got into Madrid, where we have the worst winter storm in 50 years. So
yeah, I've seen some images. Unbelievable.
Let me ask you a question, James. You are responsible. You are responsible for sales in your region, right?
Yes, that's one of the things I'm responsible for now. Yep.
So, do you, in your experience, do you think, how far ahead do you think your particular organization is with pricing? How do you guys set pricing?
I enjoyed that particular slide, Nacho, and you know, some of the data that you shared there. around where companies are with this was quite interesting and resonated with me and where my organization is at for sure. You know, in terms of the pricing realization piece, and getting to the point where you're holding salespeople accountable for CRM and potentially, you know, accepting the fact that you may have that churn. You know, you're moving to the next level of sales when you get to that point. Is something that I would say we're closer to. We're closer to now. I'd say with the next generation that's kind of coming through. These guys are certainly more comfortable with using. We use Salesforce as CRM. So Salesforce make it very easy. You know, there's an app for the phone. You know, I reiterate to the guys that look, just it's important. Just 2 or 3 bullet points from every meeting. Make sure you capture that. You know, just to your point, so we can monitor that. You know, and if you leave the company, we still have that data. Or if I want to run some reports, that data is all there. I don't have to chase them around looking for it. One point I was going to bring up, I don't want to hog all the time here. You know, when you're talking about the product A, you know, customer B, and then country C. You know, one of the challenges that we face in a particular country here in Southeast Asia, and it's Indonesia. It's very much a race to the bottom. You know, in terms of being able to demonstrate the value, even though we're market leader in the area, is very challenging. Everything is, all tenders are evaluated on pricing only, and there are
pricing
a number of
only.
yeah.
So the tenders, there's no other requirement. It's just the cheapest option.
Yeah, I mean there are technical requirements. You know, there are always technical and competency requirements, but generally speaking, it's all about price. It's all about price, and you know, with IO. So you know, we're in the energy business. We deal with national oil companies, and we deal with some international oil companies. With the international oil companies, it's far easier to get that pricing up because they have internal experience sharing of the value that, you know, that our particular technology can bring, and therefore it's easier to make that case for a higher price point. But for the national companies, this is very, very difficult. You know, it's almost, it's a race to the bottom. So at that point, you have to, for us anyway, we kind of just have to make a decision. Yeah.
Exactly. So at that point, one of your first segmentations would be public or private company, because you're going to have 2 completely different approaches in terms of this go through tender, and in this particular country or this region through tender, it's all about the pricing, and it's a race to the bottom. Then you're looking at pricing strategies, fairly simple in terms of cost plus. Okay, how much can we live with for this? Knowing that doesn't mean that you need to have the same strategy for all of the other customers. Whereas you're saying you can sell on value, you have a case, because also they understand. But for that highlights the importance of coordination with pricing, because if those companies, you are their client, or they're your client in several countries, you need to have that coordination with those countries internally to know that you can sell them on the value. Look, I may not have worked with you before, or we haven't done this, but you know as well as I do that when we did this together in Thailand, it was a huge success, and this is the value that we added. That's what we're looking at doing here. Therefore, that's the price.
Yeah, it's true. No, it's a good point, and I guess also the product segmentation piece. You know, to your point about, you know, Armani and Armani Exchange and that sort of diffusion brand, or, you know, a product which doesn't quite have the same, you know, cost component. You know, potentially that's a way of approaching that market.
And it's important. I've had experiences where, well, experience is a light word. I had frequent clashes with the president of sales of one company, because this was a gentleman that had been in that company, in that industry, running sales for 40 years. Here comes this other guy, me, that is telling him, we shouldn't be pricing like that. It's not. That's not how you price things. You're saying next year we're going to raise prices by 8%, and it's going to stick. And I would say there's no basis. You're going to raise prices 8% for everybody, for every product in every region. Why not 7 or 9? And that went against the fiber of this guy. That company was not. It was built on relationships. Now, if I go as a president, if I go and I talk to the president of this company, there's going to be 8%. When I go golfing, it's going to be 8%. Fine, but you cannot golf with every customer in the country, can you? I'm pretty sure he could if he tried, but you shouldn't anyway. But so we need a process, but you need to have that buy-in from the top. So I learned the wrong way. This guy never bought into the system. Remember the system I was describing about this company, brought the software linked to the ERP, huge investment. That was pushed by the owners of the company. There was an investment fund. But the president of sales, that was one of the old guys, never bought into it. Therefore, the sales managers never bought into it. Therefore, the sales reps never bought into it. So we went through a whole change management exercise that at the end didn't work out. You learn from failure too. You should never work out. Why? Because of that one guy never bought in. And you need to be conscious of that, because you may be hitting a wall. And if that's the type of leadership that is in place, that's not one of the guys, like we were saying, I'm not going to use the CRM. Well, we'll find someone else that does. The president of sales, the own part of the company, have been for 40 years there. So that's going to take a different strategy.
Yeah. No, interesting. Good points, Nacho. Appreciate it. And the pricing is personal piece is I think is something that, you could easily dismiss, if you're in B2B situation, but I mean, in tenders, maybe it's not quite as important, or maybe what's your thoughts on that, on the pricing is personal piece when it comes to tendering?
Well, the way tenders typically work, at least in Europe, so it may be different in Southeast Asia. So let's think, for example, I'm going to talk about my personal experience running company, medical devices. So first you need to create the need for a hospital. We were in ophthalmology. So these would be microscopes and all the devices that are used to do the diagnostics. And then the surgery, if you have cataract, for example, you need to put a small intraocular lens in your eye, all the microscopes and whatnot surgery. So first you need to create the need for the tender with the chief of ophthalmology in the public hospital. We have this new product, can do this that this other cannot do. We were a company that were very much based on how technologically advanced the products were. And once the need was created, there may be a tender that comes out of that. But it was you talking to that guy, who, by the way, is the same you're going to be talking to 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, when you need to sell more intraocular lenses. It's still personal. So in tenders, you need to deliver, because sometimes the guy would say, you came and convinced me that this microscope was the next big thing after bread came sliced. Okay, but now we put a tender because we want to get one, not that one, similar one, and now you're coming through and telling me this is 2 million euros. When the last one we purchased from you, was very good, still working, and it was 1.5 million. Now you need to justify that 500,000. Look, so you need to be able to, when you create that need, make sure you're upfront with where the price ranges you're talking about. That cannot be a surprise. If it's a surprise at the end, then it's personal on the wrong way. But business, James, you know it the same as I do. Business is always personal. When people say in the movies, it's not personal, it's business. When you're doing business with someone, you have someone that you're dealing with, and then it's that person and you're representing your company, that person representing their company, but it's personal. Because if you want to have a lasting, productive relationship, it's going to be with that person until somebody else is sitting on that chair.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it's something that's often missed. So it's a good point, and it's something for us all to remember. Yeah, thanks, Nacho.
Thank you, James. Anybody else? Any comments, questions?
Hey, good afternoon, Nacho. This is Emilio.
Hello, Emilio. How are you, buddy?
How are you doing? Oh, very, very good, very good. Still here in Singapore, not able to travel anywhere, but at least it's warm, so it's good.
That's the same for everybody. I should be there, right? I should be there live.
Yeah, you should be here. You should be here.
Next year, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I want to touch, yeah, maybe connect to what James was saying, and I feel his pain, particularly in Indonesia, Malaysia. I agree with him. Some tenders are really just looking at the price, especially the governmental ones. So I think, as you said, or our experience is that we actually decide not to bid to these kind of tenders if we didn't have a chance, as you said, to influence the tender somehow or talk to the customer before. Having a look at the specification before release, because that is the way we can be sure we can sell our additional value, which is not just the price. So I think we have been very drastic, and yeah. So
and Emilio,
for us, it's basically a no bid.
That sends a huge message to the organization that says, if this tender is basically based on price and we don't want to go that low, and therefore we're just not going to participate because we don't think we're going to get it, and if we get it that low, it's not going to be worth it. That sends a message to the organization that we are not here to just be the cheapest guy on the block, because there'll always be someone cheaper. There will always be someone that says, you know what, if they are offering this for 1,000, we're going to offer it for 950, and there someone will say we're going to do it for 900, and so on. And you get into that price war that the ones that benefit are the tenders. That's why they push it so it goes on pricing, because obviously they're interested in paying the lowest price. But I think that sends a very, very firm message. Now, you're saying you have done this, or you're doing that now?
No, we are doing this since years. Is something we have been starting doing when exactly we have seen this price war, and it's not the way we want to play this game. But
do you think it has helped the perception in the market of your company, of your products and service?
Yes, on the market. But this is my point, and what I wanted to talk with you is it's difficult to change the mindset internally. It's much easier to change the mindset of a perception of our customers, so they know it's a premium product, and they're not going to value us only on price. But internally, the first feeling, the first let's say message that comes from our salespeople when we step out from a tender, or we don't want to bid, or we enter in a price war, is we can be cheaper. We have to be cheaper. This is the market where we are. We need to be cheaper, and it's very difficult to change the mindset. So during your presentation, when you get to the point about training and change of mindset, I think that is the most important part, particularly in organizations which are well structured. So they have all the tools that we are describing. We can track, we can predict the price, we can understand the market. But still, the people are not embracing it, because they feel like this business being done in a different way for many years. So how can we sell now at higher price?
So people typically one of the questions that goes on people's mind whenever there's a fundamental change in a company is, what's in it for me? So I've been doing this the same way for 25 years. And how are you going to change? How is that going to make me feel better? How am I going to benefit from this? What are the benefits of this for me? Not for the organization, not for me. How is that going to impact me? And that's for certain people will never change, in terms of, it doesn't matter how many times you explain the benefits. It doesn't matter how many times you explain how this is necessary for the company to move forward in a strategic direction. That's why it's so important that I said it needs to come from the top. If the CEO has a town hall and says, this is who we're going to be from now on, and that's part of every communication, that's part of every, and that's something that is being hammered on people time and time again, but also taking the people's feedback about, you need to be part of this. You need to be part of not only setting up the system, the prices, and executing. You need to be part of it. And then you get to the what's in it for me. compensation. Simple as that.
Right.
Certainly with the Salesforce, you will see a change in behavior if you run two of the KPIs that I mentioned, profit leakage, I believe it was, and pricing realization. If those go into the compensation level for the Salesforce, you're going to see them all of a sudden having a huge interest in how do you get that number? What does this mean? How are we? And they'll get much more involved. And again, that's going to lead to churn. Some people are not going to survive, but that's a good or a bad thing. And that's up for debate. But if the company is moving, companies are like a big boat that is moving. And if you fall in the water, you better swim fast to catch it because the boat is leaving. Just it's going in a direction, and it's not easy to steer a boat. You remember the Titanic and the iceberg? It wasn't as easy as just turning in your car and moving. That takes a long time to turn. Pricing is the same with organizations. Changing the culture, changing the way you do pricing is you're trying to steer that boat, and that takes a little. But once you're in the new direction, there's no coming back. That's who we are now. So I understand your challenges. Let me close that door. I'm sorry. Now you're here.
No worries.
My 3 kids in action. I heard the door opening before, and you didn't see them because the camera doesn't go that low. But 2 of them, the 4-year-old and the 3-year-old, came in. But they left afterwards. So yeah, Emilio, that's the most difficult thing, as I mentioned here.
Yeah, it is.
Change management. How do you get people on board? That's the toughest thing, because you may go through all this and say, we're ready, you have the strategy, these are the new pricing, this is what we're going to do, communications, but you're relying on those people to make it happen. Make it happen. So training for the Salesforce, make them understand the process. I spent a great deal of time in that example of the industrial company, where I was saying, this is the price you should be charging this guy for this product. Are you nuts? Come on, how am I going to charge him $12? Last time I saw him was $8. And I said, last time you saw him was $8. But this other guy that sits next to you sold sometimes to the same customer more expensive, or to the very same customer segmentation, same area, more expensive. As a matter of fact, you did a year ago. It's just you weren't tracking this. You know, it depends the conversation, the relationship you had with the customer. There's a ton of variables that go into it. And as I said, the people that are on board will thrive. Then you look back at your organization and say, the ones that are on board, they're outpace the other ones by a mile.
Thank you, Nacho.
All right. Thank you, Emilio. It's, I believe it's 8:30 back in Singapore, 1:30 p.m. here in Spain. I think Wendy, we're ready to close. I'd like to thank everybody for joining. I hope this was interesting. I spare you all the jokes that I typically do in class simply because we didn't have the time. But I hope for the alumni, I truly hope to see you in person next year. For those of you that joined just because you had an interest in the program, hopefully I will see you again. And if not, maybe I'll see you next time that we do one of these seminars. So Wendy, unless you have anything to add, I think we are done.
Thank you, Nacho. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. So for those who have joined us late, we'll be sending you the link to the video recording. And do join us next year if Nacho is here in person. Thank you once again.
Perfect.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you. Emilio, great to see you. Bye.